All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll probably still have a few people joining us, I'd say, but we'll get started. We're right on the 3:30 p.m., so we may as well get started, just given I'm conscious that you're probably all very busy. So you should be able to see the screen. So again, we'll have all the slides going through just as a bit of a snapshot as to what we're going to be covering off. So this webinar is all about business continuity in the UK schools. So we've got a slideshow just to run through some of the key components. This is webinar 3 of 4. We've already covered off the general business resilience one, the emergency management one. This one will go through very high level around what business continuity is about. And then on the 9th of September, we'll go through critical incident management. This session is going to be very high level, but it'll cover off all the key components and key steps of what you need to go through for business continuity. So a little bit about us before we jump into some administration. We've been working with schools for over 25 years, specifically within consulting, education, e-learning, and also selling products. And we cover off emergency management, business continuity, critical incident management for high duty of care organisations. And extremely passionate. We could definitely talk for days about all these components, but we'll limit it to the 30 to 60 minutes that we've got today. So what we'll go through is the best practice. So there's 7 or so steps that we'll go through in terms of building out your business continuity program. We'll go through the linkage between critical incident management and business continuity. We'll go through conducting a business impact analysis and just run through what that entails, and also the process of selecting your recovery strategies, which are key elements for building out your business continuity program. All right, so administration would love you to engage in this webinar. Feel free to jump into the chat room, throw in comments, throw in questions. David's there monitoring as well. My name's Cheryl, by the way. David will be monitoring the chat room, and we'll jump in and pause a couple of times just to run through any questions anyone's got. And we'll pause after each section to see if anyone's got any specific questions or contributions. You may have contributions that you want to share with everyone as well. Your videos can be on or off. You will be muted, and we will be circulating a copy of this webinar to everyone and following through with the report as well. In terms of references, from a business continuity perspective, there are a range of different resources. All of this coming about through the tightening up of the changes, especially Martin's Law, which obviously originated from terrorist attacks. So there's a number of different references that are coming through that have been in place for a few years, but also as of April 2025. But in reference to business continuity, probably the go-to and the one I would recommend the highest would be the Business Continuity Institute Good Practice Guidelines, Edition 7. That is a fantastic resource and gives a really good nuts and bolts around business continuity and everything business continuity entails. We'll be going through very high level in terms of what some of those components are, but if you're wanting a resource later on, you can certainly refer to that edition. All right. Those of you who have been in this in the webinars prior to now, this will be very similar, but obviously we're focusing on business continuity, but I'm going to go through the whole lot anyway. This haystacks diagram gives a really nice reference to incident levels in a one-page flow. So we start with risk management, obviously, and the risk management is important at every single phase of what you're going through with the incidents, and it's about preventing incidents from happening in the first place, but also minimizing the impacts of what's happening. And today in particular, with going through the business continuity, a lot of that is around minimizing the impact of disruptions to your schools, trusts, organizations. Inevitably, you'll end up with an incident. You've all been involved with incidents. So the first piece of activity is emergency management, where you're going to be protecting people. You go through your evacuation process. There's danger inside, you move people outside. If there's danger outside, you move people inside. Or it might be that there's evac, lockdown, or evacuation. The critical incident management is really around the leadership that the school's undertaking or your organisation's undertaking to make sure that students and pupils are safe, and leading the school or organisation through those particular components. So your executive teams would be getting together and leading the organisation, assessing the situation and making decisions. We'll cover off more in our September webinar on the critical incident management components. Today is really about business continuity. And this one here, you can see from a time continuum, it starts a little bit after emergency management. Obviously, the priority is always going to be our people. Let's make sure our people are safe. Then what we do is our leadership team need to get in and start assessing the situation to determine the impact and determine what actions need to be taken. And then business continuity, we will need someone on that leadership team starting to assess what's the impact to the business operations itself. And that's what business continuity is about. It's about getting the school operations or your organizational um, operations back up and running with as little impact as possible. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And that's the business continuity piece. It'll start fairly early on just to identify what is going to cause the disruption and minimizing that as much as possible up front. But you'll see there it could go for long term. So it might be over a few days, it might be a few weeks, it could be a few years if you look at something like COVID. And that's where the business continuity fits in, and certainly what we'll be covering off today. So in terms of the 7 key items that we'll go through, it is going to be fairly high level, and again, would open up to any questions that anyone has. We'll go through threat assessment in terms of what's going to be entailed with that and really depicting what is going to cause a disruption to the business. So it's really going to be threat assessment based on disruption to your operations. The business impact analysis, we'll go through that in terms of what that actually entails. The recovery strategy development, which is a process of developing out some recovery strategies that would lead into your business continuity plan. Then your business continuity plan, then your training, your exercising and testing. So we'll go through each of these different components and we'll pause after each just to identify any questions that you may have and go through any contributions that you've got at that point. All right. First step, threat assessment. This is something we have spoken about previously, and it ties into that haystacks diagram in terms of risk management. You need to be doing a threat assessment. Now, you've probably already done operational risk assessments, strategic risk assessments. You've probably got a risk register in place. This is essentially going to tie into it. But what you're looking at is what's going to cause a disruption, what's going to stop the school or your organization from actually operating. And that's essentially the focus for this is what's going to cause an interruption. It should link into your risk matrix. So your risk management framework will obviously dictate how that risk assessment's done. It'll need to link into your risk registers. And in terms of minimum completing annually, now Martin's Law with that coming in, it's actually every 6 months that you'll need to evidence that you're actually updating those risk assessments. Again, focusing on disruptions. So what we're going to do in the polling, we're just going to list out a few events and want you to select whether it's going to be an operational disruption or whether it's going to be probably more emergency management related or critical incident management related. So again, focusing on what's going to stop the school or your trust or your organization from operating. So I'm just going to bring the poll up. So it should be coming up on the screen now. Work your way through each of those 5 as to whether it causes a disruption, whether it's business continuity or not business continuity. So tick the ones that are going to cause an operational disruption. All right, we might still have a few people jumping in to find the poll. The poll should have come up on the screen for you to be able to participate. All right, so I'll end poll and show the results of that, and we'll just run through that. One of the things I find with this, whenever we're consulting with the schools, it's always really important to distinguish between what's a critical incident and what's a business continuity. And it's so closely aligned with everything we go through with critical incident management and business continuity. So it's important to understand where the differences are, but also where the commonalities are. So fire not resulting in extensive damage. So that one there is probably not going to cause too much of a disruption to the business itself. Yes, we may need to evacuate. And yes, we may need to pause for 20 minutes, half an hour, however long it takes you to evacuate. If it doesn't result in extensive damage, we'll probably be back. So it may not, yes, it's going to be inconvenient, but it's probably not going to stop the operations of the school for long term. You may be missing out on a class and maybe disrupting for that period in the timetable, but it's not necessarily going to result in you being able to have to stop operations, close the campus, and activate business continuity plans. So I'd actually suggest for that one there, if it's not resulting in extensive damage, it's probably not going to fall into business continuity. Definitely not for activating a business continuity plan anyway. If a fire resulted in you losing a building, it's definitely business continuity because you're going to have to reroute classes. You're going to have to reroute and redo timetabling and things like that. So it's definitely going to be emergency management where you need to evacuate persons, and it may activate critical incident management. Potentially, you may have to get the leadership team together, but it's probably not going to be a long-term impact. Death of the student, always an interesting one. And it's always an interesting one with the discussions we have with all our clients. Is does this stop the operations of the school? So it's always a good question mark. Is it a critical incident? Absolutely. You'll want to activate your leadership team. You need to activate your critical incident management team. We need to manage and lead the school, the trust, the organisation through that. But is it going to stop the operations of the school? No doubt you'll be organising memorial services and things like that, and there'll be a bit of rerouting of timetabling. So if that's going to be extensive for you, then yes, you may activate your business continuity plans. And depending on how often this happens, would also fall into whether this is going to be a common practice, hopefully not, or whether it's going to be falling more into either business continuity or critical incident. But I'd probably argue for that one there. It's definitely going to be critical incident, but I'd probably question whether it's going to be business continuity in terms of, is it going to stop the operations of the school? Cyber attack, 100%. Absolutely a business continuity event. It will stop your operations, and you will need to have a business continuity plan in place to make sure you can continue operations without having a systems potentially for a few weeks. So cyber attack is absolutely business continuity, and it's a critical incident. You will need to activate the business continuity plan or that part of your critical incident management plan. Medical emergency, I would put that down as an emergency. It's definitely going to have a interruption to a couple of people. Your first aiders will be getting in there and treating for the medical emergency. You may have one or two people going off to hospital, but it won't stop the operations of the school. You'll still be able to function as a school. You'll still be able to run your timetabling, depending on who's impacted. If you've had a key person, so it might be that head teacher is impacted, if it's going to stop the operations of the school, then it would be business continuity. But if it's not going to stop the operations of the school or the trust or the organisation, then medical emergency I would consider as probably part of either business as usual or emergency management, probably not critical incident management or business continuity. Major flooding resulting in access issues, absolutely. That's going to be 100% business continuity because it is going to stop the operations of your organisation. You won't be able to operate as normal, and you will need to rework how you're going to operate. Therefore, you need to activate your business continuity plan. So it's always useful just going through that exercise, and that's the advantage of doing the threat assessment, going back to the threat assessment piece, because you're going to identify what's going to cause a disruption and being really clear with what's a business continuity event versus a critical incident event. Now, one of the things we do when we're developing out the critical incident management plan and business continuity plans for schools, we always consolidate them because you're going to have the same leadership team managing the disruption. But we always separate out the business continuity because it'll be really a focus on what's going to impact on the critical business functions. I'll pause there for a moment. Does anyone have any questions on the threat assessment piece or any contributions? Okay, no questions at this point. All right. So business impact analysis. So this part here is the most detailed part of every business continuity. A lot of people will try and put together a business continuity plan, but without a BIA, without the business impact analysis, really your business continuity plan is not going to have the depth it needs and not going to be able to cover off everything to be able to recover the operations. So the BIA, essentially what it is, it's a process of going through and analysing what activities does the school or your organisation go through, and what resources do you need to get those functions back up and running, or those activities back up and running? What IT do you need? What equipment do you need? What people resources do you need? That's what the BIA is. So you'd be chatting with finance, for example. One of their functions would be we need to process payroll. We need to process your enrollments. We need to process any of the ongoing invoices to suppliers. So you've still got your suppliers able to provide resources during a disruption or not during a disruption. So the again, you're identifying what those critical business functions are through meeting with every single business area. So whether it's finance, whether it's your operations, your facilities, catering, uniforms, enrollments, marketing, communications, all of the different areas of the business, you'd want to have a meeting with them, have a look at what are the functions they do on a day-to-day basis, what equipment do you need, what people do you need, what IT do you need. Out of that process, you then determine what's critical. So you end up with a list of critical business functions that whoever is responsible for that during a disruption, they will then look through that list and go, right, what do we need to have up and running in the first 24 hours? They work through that list to make sure that you've got all of that up and running. So if we go back to our cyber attack, if you've lost all your systems, you still need to be able to function. So it's about how do you function without your IT systems, potentially for a few weeks. If you have a major flood, you're obviously going to have a disruption and you're going to lose access to your campuses potentially, or you're going to have a number of people still on campus. But either way, you're not going to be operating your normal timetable. There is going to be disruption. So it's about how long can you do without that? Part of this assessment is, can you close up campus for a day? Can you close up campus for a week? Depending on the time of year and what else is happening, I'd suggest probably most of our schools will be a couple of days that they could close up campus for, with provision for your key exams. But that's a determination you need to go through in the BIAs to identify what is critical, what's going to stop the operations, and what do you need to then do to get back up and running. This BIA process is a very detailed process. Generally, this will take the most time out of the entirety of your business continuity. It's a step you don't want to miss. You want to make sure you've got that analysis. The other part of going through this process is once you've identified those critical business functions, you're also then identifying any potential threats that haven't been picked up through your other threat assessment. So it's just adding to the threat assessment, but also identifying what are those disruptions going to be, and therefore what do you need to have in your business continuity plan. So what I'd like you to do in the chat room, I'd like you to list out what the typical critical business functions would be for yourselves in your organizations that you would need to have recovered in the first 24 hours. So I'll give you a few moments to work on that. So the typical functions you'd need to have recovered in the first 24 hours. Timetabling, yep, absolutely. IT systems, yes. All right, I can't see too many other ones up there. So some other examples would be obviously processing payroll. If payroll's due tomorrow, that will be a key priority. If payroll isn't due for another week or two, you don't have to stress too much about that one. But if you don't pay your staff, you're going to have issues with your staff actually coming back and working in that short term. So payroll would be one. Diverting your phones, making sure that you can actually take in phone calls from external. You're going to have parents calling in, you're going to have the community calling in, so you need to be able to take those calls. Being able to access your pupil records, such as health records. You definitely need to be able to access all of that in a very short amount of time. So if you've got all of those systems and that data on premises from an IT perspective, and if the systems are knocked out, how are you going to be able to do that without the systems? Or it might be that you've got a really big event happening and it's at that time, or it might be a massive exam. And if your buildings aren't accessible for whatever reason, whether it's a flood or a massive property damage, then you need to be able to have alternate arrangements for where you're going to hold those exams. Where are you going to move your people to? If you've got boarding houses, that would be another one in that first 24 hours where your pupils need somewhere to stay. So where are you going to relocate your pupils to and your residents to be able to be accommodated somewhere else? So they're all the sorts of things that you'd be wanting to look at in the first 24 hours. Again, your business impact analysis will weed out what is critical in the first 24 hours for your particular organization, and therefore what do you need to cater for in your business continuity plan. All right, so that's the second piece. Next piece, once you've finished your business impact analysis, generally once you've finished that process, I would actually just close that off with a validation meeting with your exec team, just to make sure everyone's really comfortable with what is critical and make sure you've aligned across each of the different business areas. You may have some business areas that have said that they need something up and running really quickly, and you look at it and go, look, it actually isn't needed that quickly, or vice versa. So really good to do that validation first. Once you've got those outputs, next stage is to go through your recovery strategies. Now, the recovery strategies is basically what is the step-by-step process you're going to go through for those disruptions. Now, unlike your critical incident management or your emergency management, you're generally going to have a checklist in those cases for things like a fire or a bomb threat or a gas leak, or, from a Martin's Law perspective, you need to reference terrorism. Emergency management, critical incident management, you'll need to call those out separately and have a checklist for these. For business continuity, if you have a checklist for every single disruption, you're going to have a lot of them. What we tend to do here is have a checklist for disruption-based rather than event. So the examples that we would suggest, things like access to buildings. So if you've had, say, a flood, you're going to lose access to a building potentially. Potentially you're going to lose access to boarding facilities. If your IT is based on servers on premises, you may have your IT knocked out. You may lose access to key equipment potentially if that's a dependency there. So that's based on a flood. On a cyber attack, you're going to look at loss of IT and potentially even loss of access to building if you've got online swipes to be able to get in and out of buildings. That will be a key loss for you potentially in terms of being able to get access to the building. Again, the BIA process will identify where those dependencies are and what potential loss strategies there are. So identifying your threats, identifying what's critical, you then determine what are the disruptions that you need to be prepared for, and therefore you would have a checklist for each one of these. These are the typical ones that we have for schools. So if we've lost access to a building, if you've got boarding, obviously you need to cover that off. Loss of IT, the loss of key person, loss of key equipment, supply chain, and then utilities. Utilities isn't often needed for a lot of organizations, but obviously being a school, if you lose water, for 20 minutes is probably fine. But if you lose access to water for an hour, all of a sudden you can't use the toilets, you can't practice your hygiene, all of those sorts of things. So you're going to be in business continuity mode, and you will need to have a checklist in relation to that particular disruption. So identifying what those strategies are and then pulling together a checklist for each one of those strategies, which would then feed into the business continuity plan, which is the next step, is your business continuity plan. As I referenced earlier, with your business continuity plan, we always consolidate this for schools and have a consolidated critical incident management plan and business continuity plan, with business continuity having a module within that critical incident management plan. We find that streamlines the process because you've got the same leadership team generally looking after these processes. So it makes sense to have one document and therefore the team reference the same sorts of materials. And I would have a person responsible for business continuity on that critical incident management team. And we'll go through that in our next webinar in a lot more detail in terms of padding out what that team structure looks like. So in terms of some other components that you'd have in the business continuity plan, you definitely want reference to your team structure. So if you are consolidating it, and if you've got one critical incident management team that's going to cover off a critical incident as well as business continuity, and most of the time, if you've got a business continuity event, it's a critical incident as well, and you're having to activate that management team or the leadership team. So you need a team structure to define who's going to do what. I would suggest that's your critical incident management team. If you are part of larger organizations or if you're responsible for multiple campuses or multiple sites, then you may very well have a separate business continuity team or a separate crisis management team on top of your critical incident management team at a local school level, depending on how your organisation is structured and how many sites you are responsible for. Again, we'll go through a lot more of that detail in our next webinar in terms of team structures and how to go about that. And we'll have some time at the end of this as well if you are wanting to do a bit of a deep dive into some of that now. Very happy to. But first things first, you need a team to be able to manage this situation. Recovery coordinator checklist. Sorry, the mouse keeps jumping there. Recovery coordinator checklist, as I referenced on the team structure, you are going to need a number of different functional coordinators. One of those coordinators I would suggest is responsible for business continuity. We usually call it a recovery coordinator. Their sole responsibility is to make sure that you've got your critical business functions back up and running and that you can still operate as you need to. So the recovery coordinator will need a checklist, and that will take them through for, say, the first 24 hours for the recovery pieces till we get our critical business functions back up and running, and then through to business resumption, which is all about getting us back to where we were pre-interruption status. So checklist for the recovery coordinator is definitely something we want to have built into this. As I said a couple of times already, I would consolidate critical incident management plan and your business continuity plan, depending on the structure of your organization. And you would have that recovery coordinator checklist in line with your comms checklist and your leadership checklist and your operations and people and staff and pupil coordinators and things like that. Critical business functions, you want a list of critical business functions. You want to be able to pull out and go, what do I need to focus on? What needs to be brought up and running to make sure that you've got your functions back up and running. You can operate as the school again. So having a list of critical business functions is going to be really important. Recovery strategy checklist. So as we talked about previously, if you lose IT, if you lose access to building, if you lose access to supply chain, having a recovery strategy checklist built into your plan is going to be really important. Relocation plans. Having a relocation plan for non-teaching staff. So are they going to work from home? Are they going to relocate to an alternate location and work from there? Where are your teaching staff and your pupils going to relocate to? Are they going to study from home? Are they going to move to a different school or a hall or demountable? What are those alternate arrangements? For your boarding facilities, you'll need a relocation plan for them. If you've got 200 boarders, where are they going to go? Are they going to be billeted out? Are they going to go back home? Are they going to go to a hotel for the next couple of days and then you arrange for them to be picked up by their families or other families? So having those relocation plans, again, part of this process where you need to have that fleshed out. Your recovery support procedures, I would highly recommend that any critical business functions in the first 24 hours, that you have a workaround for it. So a really easy example is your phones. You will still need to be able to answer phones. You're going to have probably an increased number of people calling in. So what's your phone diversion process? Is it receptionists that's going to do that? Is it IT that's going to do it? Who's going to answer that phone once it's diverted? Is it going to go through to a mobile phone? Is it going to go through to another premises? Things like payroll. If you do have to process payroll and the systems are down, how are you going to go about processing the payroll? Who has access to the payroll records? Who has access to the banking system? Who has the authorities with the bank to be able to run a pay run based off the last banking pay run until you've got the systems back up and running? So there are examples of the workarounds to go, okay, how are we going to manage this process without having access necessarily to the systems? Another example might be student records or pupil records. How are you going to access health records if the systems are down and if it's based on on-premises systems? If you've got cloud-based systems, fantastic. That's going to make your life a lot easier in terms of being able to access some of this. But you never know when you've got one of your telcos down or a key supplier down where you don't have access to that information necessarily. So having a workaround, you want to have that documented and within your business continuity plan. Now, linkage to critical incident management, I have spoken about this a few times before. I would link both and just have both access there. Now, any questions? Okay, no questions at this point. All right, happy to take questions after this as well if anyone has any. All right, so that's the business continuity plan. We'll pause again. We do have a quick activity And if you would like to go into the draw for some emergency vests, same thing we've done for the last webinar, is feel free to jump onto LinkedIn. David will pop that link into the chat room, and feel free to like it, share it, follow us, and for each interaction, you'll go into the draw for 8 emergency vests. So David will manage that and then touch base with whoever the person who gets drawn out. Okay, next piece is training. So from a training perspective, what you'll want to do is once you've determined who your team is, you can then work out who you need to train up. I would suggest the key people you're going to need to train up are your business recovery coordinator. So whoever is responsible for bringing your critical business functions back up and running, having some training for them. Usually that would probably go for an hour or two, depending on what's needed. I would personally just put them into the critical incident management team training and do it as a consolidated. But depending on the size of your organization, if you do have multiple campuses and you've got an extra layer of structure, you may actually have a separate business continuity team, in which case you need to run training for that business continuity team. In this case, I'm referring to it as a business recovery coordinator. Your critical incident management team, you definitely want to run training for them, and we'll go through in a lot more detail in our next webinar. But your critical incident management team is usually going to be your exec, and you'll want to run training for them. So usually we usually run it over 3 to 4 hours, just to make sure that the team know how to use the plan, know what their roles and responsibilities are. We usually run through a little mock scenario throughout that training process as well, just so everyone gets to interact with the tools. Things like information management tools. How are you going to track all the key information coming into the room? How are you going to make decisions? Using your impact assessment tools, using the actual plans themselves, being under a bit of pressure to work together and sort of learning each other's personalities and where strengths and weaknesses are, all those sorts of things. All staff, you want all staff to be trained up, probably staff and volunteers if you've got volunteers as well. That would generally be a fairly high level session, 30 to 60 minutes, and really covering off what could happen, what's the expectation from a staffing perspective if something happens. You want them to know that you have a critical incident management team and that you've got a critical incident management plan and a business continuity plan. What's expected of them in terms of getting updates? What's expected if they are sent home? Are they going to be still paid? Are they getting annual leave? Are they going to be brought in to assist? So it really helps with setting the expectations to run that staff training, and it just reduces some of the noise that you'll be facing during a disruption. You're going to have enough to deal with when you're dealing with a disruption. So the more that you've trained people up, the more you can set the expectations in terms of how you want it to play out. So you can be on the front foot. Any questions so far? Okay. So exercise and testing. So there's 2 elements to this. Once you have got the plans in place, plans are pretty much going to be useless unless you've actually done training and testing on them. You want to make sure that all that time you've invested in all the BIAs and pulling together your plans, you want to make sure they're going to work. The objective of your exercising and testing is to provide an opportunity for your teams to practice, build their confidence, build their capability, but you also want to identify any gaps in the process. And that's the benefit of doing the exercising. There are 2 types. With critical incident management, generally you'll jump into exercising. Business continuity actually has the testing or the live element as well. So in terms of the exercising part, that's really the process for your leadership team to get together and either discuss or run through an exercise, run through a scenario through a desktop. We usually run, or we can do any of these 3 styles, but generally we'll go through and throw our clients into a desktop where it's a simulated controlled environment. So we might go, look, let's put you into a cyber environment, or a flood situation or a bushfire situation, might be an armed active offender. Whatever incident we've discussed with our clients, we'll discuss what the outcomes are. But essentially what we're doing is putting you into a controlled environment, getting the team together, you get information injected to you. You get phone calls and SMSs and emails in a simulated environment, but you're able then to assess the situation, take the information that you need, and then assess what needs to happen and make decisions based on that in a bit of an environment where you get to test out how people are going to work together. The live element is the critical business function testing. So from a business continuity perspective, you want to make sure whatever workarounds you've got in place will work. And that's the live element. We always do this in conjunction with IT disaster recovery testing. So we would get IT to drop the IT systems out, stop, pretty much turn them all off in a controlled manner. IT, while we're doing our critical business function, IT will get the systems back up and running. While that's happening, we can then test out to go, okay, we don't have IT systems. Therefore, can we actually get our critical business functions back up and running in the timeframes that we've suggested in the BIAs? So if we've said we can divert phones in an hour, can we actually divert the phones in an hour? If we need to access health records, can we actually access the health records without the IT systems? It might be that you've got a dependency there on the boarding and you want to test out the boarding relocation processes. So that might be something that we're doing live and going, okay, well, let's actually relocate your borders to the alternate locations. Or it might be you're wanting to test out restricted access to the building. So during an exam, you might go, well, let's test out, not during the exam, but you might test out that process of going, look, let's test out that we can actually activate alternate locations. So you'd need to determine what you want to test out of that process. The common testing is IT. You lose your IT, can we get those systems back up and running in the timeframes we've outlined and identifying any gaps in those processes? So that's essentially the exercising and testing. You've got one is testing out the team and the team processes, and the other one is the business continuity live testing to make sure you can actually recover those critical business functions in the time that you've outlined and identifying gaps to make that happen. Okay, we are going to jump into a Kahoot shortly, but I'm just going to open it up for questions. We've gone through this quite quickly. As I said, it's quite high level. You could take days and days to learn all about this. We do have support mechanisms in place for anyone needing assistance. We'll jump into a Kahoot shortly, but I'll open up for any questions that anyone might have. Yep, sounding pretty quiet. All right. Well, let's get into Kahoot. We've just got half a dozen or so questions just to run through with Kahoot, and then we'll just run through next steps and where you can get some extra resources and support. So it will come up on your screen in a moment. It's coming. I'm just getting into the system. It should be there any second. Okay, you should get a pop-up now. So you should be able to access the Kahoot, write down your name, and then we'll just have a few wrap-up questions. All right, we've only got a few people on today, so I dare say the holidays and the term break has probably reduced our numbers a little bit, but we'll make a start. There's only a couple of you, so we'll work through a few questions here. And anyone who looks at the pre-recording, obviously, is going to be a good wrap-up of some of the key questions out of what we've gone through. Okay, so what does a BIA stand for? All right. No one quick enough on that one. All right, next one. So it's business impact analysis for that one. How often should you complete your disruption threat assessment? All right, so 6 monthly, yes. The answer is actually 6 monthly. I should have updated that one. Okay, select examples of critical business functions. Great. Examples of recovery strategies. All right, so loss of key person, loss of key supplier, loss of building, absolutely. And how do you check that the critical business function testing will be recovered in the appropriate time frame? And that was through the critical business function testing. Awesome. All right. What I'll do is pop out of this. We didn't have enough people participating to get that one up and running, but we will close out of that. I'm just going to reshare the screen. Should be coming back up and running now. All right. So in terms of resources, if you are wanting support on this, and obviously we're probably going to have quite a few people looking at the recording, obviously rather than participating here today. But thanks to School Business Manager for organising all of this. There will be a download in terms of a self-audit checklist. And if you're wanting some assistance with this, we do have some do-it-yourself tools. We have some BIA templates. We've got business continuity plan templates, critical incident management plan templates, all customized for schools. And we can obviously help out with actually customizing it for you to your school as well. But if you need any extra support, let us know. We'll have a report coming through with some of those self-audit checklists. We'll see you at the next webinar. So there's a critical incident management webinar on the 9th of September. Again, for those that are watching this recording, we'll probably see you in a couple of months' time. But thanks for those that have attended. We will just put a poll up here. Pretty keen for any feedback you've got for those that were actually participating today. So we'll pop that up. Would love some feedback in terms of how we went today. And then once you finish that, you are free to leave. Feel free. We'll be, David and I will be hanging back. So if there's anything you want to go through as well, very happy to go through any questions that you've got. I think we'll definitely make sure we catch during term time next time around, David. I think we've missed a lot of people due to breaks, I would imagine, and leave.
I think it's just the timing, isn't it? But definitely we have the recording and the live stream as well for everyone to watch this later on. And of course the summary report for
Yep.
everyone who are not able to make it today.
Right, so give a bit more time for everyone to finish that poll, and then you're free to leave once you're finished. All right, we'll end the poll there. I think that's enough time for everyone to have completed it. If I end it and you're still wanting to put more information in, feel free to just pop it in the chat room. Great. All right, fabulous. Thank you, everyone. We'll end it there and see you all in a few months. If you do have any further questions or want any other information, feel free to touch base with us directly. We'll send out an email with a summary, and you can touch base with us from there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.